All right, folks, we're about ready to start our programs. I do want to thank you all for coming out and supporting us. And tonight you're in for a real treat. You're going to see a reenactment of the Last Great Train Heist. And Julie Thompson, she's so dear to me. Yeah. And everything that she does, she puts her heart and soul and strength into everything that she does. We asked her to be a one-room schoolhouse teacher at our fall festival last year, and she poured her heart into that. And it was us asking her. But so I'm so thankful to have her here tonight. Her book is so exciting. You will want to buy a copy of it, and once you pick it up, you will not want to stop reading it. It is packed with things. And I read a lot of historical books, and they can either be very dull or they can be exciting. And I love an author that makes history come alive. And Julie makes history come alive. She made Alvin Barker-Karpis come alive to me. And I want to thank Abigail, because Abigail made Barker-Karpis. Wait till you see the transformation. And Abigail Stevenson is a graduate of Hiram College, and Julie will tell you more, but she is just amazing as Creepy Al Karpis. And I want to thank, I call him Eddie, but Ed, I want to thank him for all he does in his support. And we wish you and Julie all the best, and you, Abigail, in your future. And we wish you the best with her book. Her book was on the #1 bestseller list in Germany, and it is doing well all over the world. But it's going to go to Alcatraz in the museum there, and they've already ordered a number of copies. And that's a big open door for Julie. And I personally think this book would make a great movie or a documentary. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie Thompson, and you just enjoy what you're about to see. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to come and visit us. I think this is going to be a very exciting program. Hopefully one of the more exciting programs you've been to. As Claudia mentioned, my name is Julie Thompson. I'm now an author. I'm a local historian. And I will also be selling and signing copies of my book. This is it here, The Hunt for the Last Public Enemy in Northeastern Ohio, with the call-out Alvin Barker-Karpis and his road to Alcatraz. So this program and my book actually features the 1935 train robbery in Garrettsville. And so being a lifelong resident of Freedom Township myself, I'm also alumna of James A. Garfield High School, alumna of Hiram College, and I consider myself kind of qualified when I took on this story years ago. So before we actually begin, I'd like to thank a few people. First and foremost, members of the Freedom Township Historical Society. Thank you so much for so graciously hosting me this evening. And you saw Claudia Garrett. I'll tell you, this woman, anytime you ask her anything, hey, Claudia, can I get in? Can we practice? We end up being here maybe 2 or 3 hours. She stays the whole time, and then, stays before we leave. Let me know what time you need me back here tomorrow. So that's the type of president she is, and I want to thank her for not only supporting me, supporting this book, and you've just done such a bang-up job with this Historical Society. These members, each and every one of them, I've been a part of it for the last year, and I can tell you that they have, if they're not working daily, at least every week on some important project in our community. So without you guys, we can't have programs like this. So on that same note, with the Freedom Township Historical Society, I'd like to invite you folks tonight to donate, as Claudia indicated. They are trying to restore and preserve the last one-room schoolhouse in Portage County. How exciting is that? Right. Really? How many folks have been there? Have you been to the schoolhouse? Well, you haven't been there, you have to go, right? Yeah. So I invite you to give a donation to this organization to help us do that, to keep these programs going. And I'd also like to thank my husband, who's hiding behind that curtain over there, Ed. He's going to be conducting some flawless technical support tonight, right, honey? We hope. Just pray everything goes as planned. And then, of course, I have this really cool retired biology teacher from James A. Garfield, Mr. Rich Teresi, who tends to follow me around to all these programs. So I want to thank him and his wife, Fran, here in the front, for always kind of being at the beck and call of our community. They really are. They add so much. I can't even begin to tell you. So thank you, Rich. Thank you, Fran, so much. I'd like to introduce Miss Abigail Stevenson. She's a recent Hiram College grad. She's an impressive young lady, as you'll come to find out. She actually graduated 2 majors and 2 minors from Hiram. Her majors include, let me make sure I get this right, environmental studies, and then art, and then minor is communications and theater. So she's currently a full-time employee of Hiram College, and in her spare time, she likes to do reenactments for the Henry County Historical Society. They have an actual 1860s log home on the fairgrounds, and she does reenactments there as well. So we are so lucky to get you, I'll tell you. You will see, folks. So thank you, Miss Abby. Now, to make a long story short, it was my Hiram College capstone, which 6 years ago led me to this story. It was 2012. I was in my senior year, history major, trying to think, what in the world am I going to do for a research project? And so I thought, no, I don't want to do the Civil War. I don't want to do Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or the Revolutionary War. Those are fantastic topics, right? I wanted to do something a little less researched, something that hasn't been unearthed. And so it just so happened that I was watching the 2009 crime drama Public Enemies starring Johnny Depp. Who's seen it? Anybody? A couple? Oh, come on, a couple people? It's a fantastic movie. It's based on Brian Burroughs, the historian, his book called Public Enemies. And in one of the scenes, it was the year 1933, and it was Tennessee. The G-men, or government men, were actually in the process of a raid of a gangster at the time known by the name George Machine Gun Kelly. I'm sure folks have heard of him. Well-known bank robber and kidnapper at the time. And the G-men were getting ready to bust into his apartment. And I saw on the outside of the apartment G-men. And it hit me like a jolt. And I was taken back to my 7th grade classroom with the iconic Ms. Zyba Walker. Everybody knows her, right? Or almost everybody knows her, or had her as a history teacher. In any case, I remember her talking about the 1935 train robbery. And she also talked about how the G-men, or government men, flooded the village after the heist. And so the G-man was a unique name given to my high school's mascot, probably many of yours, for its athletic team decades ago. And the investigation into this robbery and into the G-men led me to one of the most notorious gangsters that I have never heard of. Never. And most people I knew never heard of him. Can you guess his name? All right, you guys, you studied for this, didn't you? Alvin Barker-Karpis. And he became the last public enemy of the Depression era. And remarkably, while researching this train heist, the government men, and Alvin Barker-Karpis, I was able to prove that this train heist in Garrettsville on November 7th, 1935, was the last successful train heist in American history. Here, folks, in our community. Can you believe that? That's remarkable. And so that led, after I graduated from Hiram, it was October 2013, I submitted an application to the Ohio State Historical Society for a commemorative marker. It was approved, and lo and behold, today you can view that concrete marker on Hankey Road within the village limits, adjacent to the former railway and behind S&K tractor sales. So it's got a few weeds growing up around it, but that's okay. You can still see it. From there, in February of 2017, with some coaxing from my husband, again hiding behind the curtain, I decided that I was going to try and write a book about this topic because it deserved it. I mean, you can't make stuff like this up. So I was contracted by History Press out of South Carolina, which has actually been around for 100 plus years. And they're the largest history publishers in the country. They actually kind of sought me out. They were really interested in the story. So lo and behold, that is what you're going to see here tonight. So for folks who have not heard the story about Barker-Karpis and the Last Great Train Heist, here's a brief overview, just so you kind of have the context. He was the last public enemy, #1 of the Depression era. He reportedly compiled a record of 54 aliases, 15 bank robberies, 14 murders, unbelievable, 3 jailbreaks, and 2 high-profile kidnappings. Now, roaming the country to evade capture or worse, he regularly hid out in northeastern Ohio, where he and the remnants of the infamous Ma Barker gang perpetrated this last great train heist on November 7th of 1935. His criminal career came to an end when J. Edgar Hoover, who became the face of the war on crime, and his famed G-men apprehended the man they wanted more than any in New Orleans on May 1st of 1936. From there, Karpis found himself confined on the dangerous and dark Alcatraz Island, where he spent nearly 26 years and more than any inmate in that prison's history. My book tells the true story of Karpis' life and his career, a riveting tale taking readers from rural Kansas and northeastern Ohio to the bustling streets of New Orleans and into the bleak innards of the Rock. Throughout the decades, as I mentioned, this local event has been adopted as the backstory of the mascot of my alma mater, James A. Garfield. As referenced by James Pezacek, a lifelong resident of Garrettsville, some of you may know him, he had always understood that the fighting G-men mascot represented the government men who flooded the area after a train robbery. Characterized, and you'll see up here on the screen, to your left, characterized by an inspector with a magnifying glass, a trench coat, and the Sherlock Holmes deerstalker style of cap, this mascot is the only one of its kind in the United States. And likewise, the Garfield G-men mascot is widely included among the list of the most distinctive and unusual high school mascots in our country. Incredible. This was the best picture combing through every yearbook I could possibly find housed at the JAG Historical Society. This was the best picture I could find of our mascot. Incredible. Now, without further ado, Abby and I are going to provide what we hope is a treat for you. We're going to use excerpts from my book. We're going to use some video. We're going to use an interview from Karpis himself. And of course, our talented Abby is going to do some reenactment. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the next 45 minutes to an hour. I'm going to take you back in time roughly 116 years ago, during an era when the James brothers and the Dalton boys pulled off regularly the Great Train Heist. This film, dated 1903, was done by Edwin Porter. He was affiliated with Thomas Edison. And so take a look at the next minute or two. On the first sultry day of May 1936, cuffed only with an agent's yellow tie, notorious gangster, bank robber, kidnapper, and suspected murderer Alvin Barker-Karpis stated self-assuredly, quote, "I made J. Edgar Hoover's reputation as a fearless lawman. It's a reputation he doesn't deserve. I made that SOB." Today, this quote holds a special interest for the residents of Garrettsville, a village of fewer than 2,500 people. So let's take a look back at that pivotal day in history before Karpis was arrested in New Orleans and when he made the brazen move to knock off that train at the Garrettsville train depot. Believe it or not, Karpis claimed that he wasn't necessarily needing the cash by the fall of 1935. What drove Karpis into action was his acknowledged desire to be busy. Karpis proclaimed,
I was aching for an exciting heist. I was going to take a mail train.
the era's last public enemy had been planning the robbery of a mail train for weeks, and Karpis had his eye on the train that carried payrolls from the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland to small Ohio towns. He took into his plan train caper 5 experienced stick-up guys, including Freddie Hunter from Warren, Harry Campbell from Toledo, John Brock, Benson Sue Groves, also known as Ben Grayson, and the seasoned Sam Coker. As a native of West Virginia, Benson Groves was the newcomer, and he came recommended by criminal companion Joe Roscoe. As an older and experienced robber in his 50s, Groves was recently released from prison after knocking over a post office in New Jersey. Although the guys were all sold on the job, Karpis recalled that it was Benson Groves who dared to question Karpis with an intimation of skepticism, stating, "Who the hell robs a train in this day and age?" Karpis's rebuttal was just one of his usual mischievous and half-cocked attempts at a smile. He was confident in his strategy. His history of criminal successes assured the rest of the gang that victory was inevitable and it was to be quite profitable. The one Karpis had his eye on was a mail train that carried the payrolls from the Federal Reserve. And Karpis believed it deserved to be taken, because on payroll day, it carried cash enough to cover the weekly salaries of workers in all the giant mills, including Warren and Youngstown, and including industrial centers of Ohio.
I was figuring about $300,000.
And the escape looked solid, and so did the details of the robbery. Karpis said it for Garrettsville. He knew that on that particular day, a train would stop carrying not one but 2 payrolls. Garrettsville had the advantage of its short distance from Fort Clinton, but it had the disadvantage of its nearest to a college town named Hiram. The college meant students and kids who kept the station's platform and parking lot crowded most hours of the day. Karpis stated,
I didn't like the idea of operating on a big job in a crowd, but that was the risk.
so for their equipment, they lined up 3 machine guns, a rifle, and 5 pistols. They filled up a briefcase with dozens of extra clips, and for good measure, Karpis packed a complete medical kit. They also took along a couple of items they rarely used in the past. Suppose, Karpis thought, the rail clerk spotted us. And suppose they slammed the mail door shut.
How would we bust in?
The answer was clear. We'd blast it open. So Karpis packed the dynamite, and he put a couple of cigars in his pockets. He planned to light one of them just before the heist got underway. If they needed to bring the dynamite into the job, he'd just use a cigar to set off the wick. On the very day they were packing their guns, checking the car, and moving towards Garrettsville for that robbery, Karpis found out from the Cleveland papers that the FBI was flooding the city with agents. They knew that Karpis was on the verge of something big, and according to the papers, the feds were set, ready, and armed to head him off.
I wasn't calling off that train keeper. Not for J. Edgar Hoover himself.
In his autobiography, Karpis proclaimed,
"My profession was robbing banks, knocking off payrolls and kidnapping rich men. I was good at it. Maybe the best in North America for 5 years, from 1931 to 1936. I might have made it in any high position that demanded brains and style and a cool, hard way of handling yourself. Certainly, I could have held the highest job there was in any line of police detection work. I outthought, outwitted, and just plain defeated enough cops and G-men in my time to know that I was more knowledgeable about crime than any of them. Including the #1 guy, J. Edgar Hoover. I became a robber, a heister, and a kidnapper.
And I was a pro.
okay, now reading from my book. Here's how it happened. It reads like a memorable scene from Clint Eastwood's 2011 biographical drama J. Edgar. During an interview with a Cleveland plain dealer, a young man in his late 20s declared, "One time I told some of my friends I'd like to be in one of those robberies just to see how it felt, but believe me, I've had enough. I can still feel that machine gun in my back." On that fateful day, November 7, 1935, Earl Davis, a young newsagent from Garrettsville, was picking up the afternoon Cleveland press. But little did he know that he would become an involuntary aide to 5 outlaws. Carried out in American Wild West fashion, these robbers, some masked with handkerchiefs, swung into position on the station's platform under the terrified gaze of nearly a dozen men and women.
Put your hands in the air. You two. Fire!
Systematically, Karpis and his fellow marauders lined up the petrified victims. Aided by the muzzle of a machine gun, Mr. Davis, who was exhausted from holding his arms up, was ordered to carry 4 heavy mail pouches from the platform to the bandits' Plymouth sedan. As he was loading the pouches into the car, Davis noticed the weapons on the seat. And not for 1 second did this family man contemplate playing the hero by seizing one of those guns. Now, there are some old-timers from the Garrettsville area who've spoken in great detail about their first-hand recollections of this last criminal act. Myron Thomas, at the time of the train heist, was just a boy of about 5 years old whose home sat within clear view of the depot. Along with his mother, Thomas watched this robbery take place from the front window of his home. In his retelling of the events, Thomas stated somewhat humorously, quote, "I remember the engineer and firemen being pulled out of the engine compartment. And there was a lot of commotion. My mother called my father at his office, which was over the Kelsey drugstore. And at that time, the only law enforcement in town was a night watchman. She then had the telephone operators connect her with the sheriff's office in Ravenna, who were really too far away to do anything. They suggested that she shoot at the escape car to mark it so that it could be identified later." True story. Since there were Tommy guns sticking out of every window as the car drove away, I think that she wisely declined their suggestion. "I was hiding behind a cast iron radiator, and that would be of little value if the Tommy guns had opened up. I believe the robbers stayed that night in Wyndham, on a farm worked by an Indian named Brotchett," end quote. Now, I later found out in researching the FBI records that the gentleman's name was Clyde Brotchett. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him down the line, but he did own a farm. He worked in the steel mills, and it's the place where the guys stayed the night before the train heist. So if anybody knows who this guy is, I would love to know. But the letter that I received from Mr. Thomas was dated May of 2014. That was his account. Back to the book. John Brock, who returned evidence against Karpis later, described a scene where Freddie Hunter had tied a handkerchief over his face while Benson Groves donned a false mustache. You know, one of those long, droopy jobs? Groves' long strip of artificial hair above his lip was reminiscent of those worn by the Western actors in the 1920s silent movies. Convinced that he might be identified, Groves rubbed rouge on his cheeks and chin, and Karpis remarked in his memoirs that Groves looked so out of sorts that he was afraid that Groves was going to, quote, scare the hell out of folks, end quote. As the robbery commenced, Karpis couldn't help but be distracted by two repairmen perched up on a telephone pole. The repairman's gaze was fixated in Groves' direction, and they were pointing while laughing hysterically. Struggling for a response to the repairman's uncontrollable laughter, Karpis heard the train whistle and instantly jumped into action. Wearing a sort of throwaway topcoat with one of the pockets ripped open, Karpis was concealing a machine gun with a 20-shot clip on a strap, and it was slung over his shoulder. Brock was standing in the middle of the station's platform, trying to look tough with his Tommy gun, but likely failed miserably. When the train stopped and the doors to the mail car swung open, Karpis leveled his machine gun at the two clerks who were staring in amazement at the outlaw. To Karpis' utter shock, the clerk slammed the mail car door shut and hid. And after throwing a stick of unlit dynamite through the mail car window and then threatening to cast in a second stick with a wick lit,
I'm gonna heave another one in there, and this time it'll be burning. You've got 5, and I'm counting now. 1, 2, 3.
Karpis had only to reach for the door swung back open. Once those doors were back open, 3 clerks now appeared. Karpis described the third clerk as a, quote, big, heavy-set Negro. He hadn't noticed the black guy before, but with agitated annoyance characterized this third clerk as a, quote, nervy SOB. You can't do this, man, he clamored to Karpis. Get off of that gun! Now, one of the 3 clerks would raise their hands in submission until Karpis tried to fire a warning shot over their heads. Yep, the gun didn't go off. But Karpis claimed that the sound of the hammer falling startled the men.
Yeah, get your hands up now. Up! Up!
Realizing that Karpis meant business, the clerk's hands instantly reached for the sky.
Higher.
Then, staring fixedly at the mail bag stacked from the floor to ceiling, Karpis took a mental tally. After securing the payroll bag for Warren, Karpis demanded the one for Youngstown. What isn't on here, the old clerk answered. Oh, dear God. It seemed the Youngstown payroll had been shipped out the previous day. And in disbelief, Karpis cried,
Look out, Harry. I'm gonna shoot this guy.
and he was mad enough to pull the trigger. And a single discharge from a gun produced a visible flash. Now, it wasn't Karpis who fired that shot, although he attempted. The ballistics evidence initially secured from the postal inspectors proved that indeed Harry Campbell, the guy from Toledo, fired his gun. In the heist of perpetrating the robbery, he fired a shot into the mail car, and the bullet ricocheted and struck one of the mail custodians. Fortunately, the bullet was deflected by the steel frame top of the mail cab, and it prevented serious injury to the clerk. Now, despite some of the hiccups during the train robbery, Karpis' criminal cutie was on point when it came to the successful heist of Erie train number 626. Though somewhat disappointing, these outlaws escaped with $34,000 in cash and $11,650 in bond securities. Now, markedly, this would be about $715,000 present day. The heist went off without any delays, and the bandits quickly escaped the unsuspecting village of Garrettsville in their Plymouth sedan. But as the bandits' car sped away, witnesses noticed the license plate number. In fact, it was C.P. Morrow, a Garrettsville coal dealer, who trailed the thieves' car part of the way, and at Freedom Station, later known as Kane's Garage, and located opposite State Route 700, Morrow lost track of the robbers who turned onto State Route 88 and headed towards Ravenna.
His last job was an act of homage to the old-time outlaws he idolized. Though the payoff was frugal, he was pleased with himself all the same.
I was aching for an exciting heist, and I thought of the great bandits of the Old West, the James brothers, the Dalton boys, and all the rest of them. I had held up a train in fine style, just like the famous old Western bandits.
Unlike his idols, he used a plane for his getaway. The end was now just a matter of time. When it came, Karpis put up no resistance, fearful that he might end up like Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd. It was 1936.
So many decades after the train robbery, our very own Claudia Garrett told an exhilarating story.
The day of the Great Train Robbery, my great-grandmother, Bernice Yonker Hitchcock Crew, was outside on the Hitchcock Crew farm located on Freedom Road, also known as Old 700, in sight of the Freedom train station. She said she became alarmed by the car that came roaring down Freedom Road, heading south past the Freedom station with men in the car. She watched the car cross the tracks and head south towards Charlestown. It was a car she had never seen before. In those days, everyone knew the make and model of their neighbors' cars, so any car they didn't recognize really stood out. Before the arsenal, Freedom Road would have been a direct route south out of the area, with major roads off of it along the way and leading to bigger towns and cities. When the family heard about the train robbery and Creepy Al, they always wondered if that was the gang roaring away with the loot from the train robbery. I may have been a hunted man, wanted by the FBI and the postal authorities, but at least I wasn't dirt poor. Momentarily, I felt pretty good.
Okay, folks, so now you saw a depiction of Karpis during the height of his criminal career, his young days. And as I mentioned, he spent 26 years on Alcatraz Island. So in research for my book, I became very communicative and connected with former guards and inmates at Alcatraz. And I interviewed this one particular gentleman who's in my book. His name is Robert Shabline. He's inmate number 1355. And he actually was very close with Karpis on Alcatraz. In fact, this man tells quite a story. He helped John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris escape Alcatraz Island in June of 1962. He also tells about trying to remove fingerprints, a new way to do it. Karpis did try to have his fingerprints removed, and he was partially successful. So he was quite proud. He's an 88-year-old former inmate. And so for the first time in his 88 years, he made the front page of the Lakeland, Florida newspaper. And I'm going to pass this around. A good picture of this gentleman. But he tells a fantastic true story. And so he sent me a couple days ago a follow-up email because he knew that I had read this and I was quite impressed by it. And here's what he wrote to me. Hi, Julie. That newspaper spread generated some interest my way. A microbrewery, bar, and entertainment center has hired me for a gig in Lakeland, Florida, the same city with the newspaper. They are going to send a driver to pick me up and take me home and will pay me $500 plus all the beer I can drink, which today's only about 3 or 4. But if it was vodka or good rum, boy, they would really lose money on me. But you know me, I am taking over 100 5x7 signed mugshots to give away, plus a bunch of those handcuff Alcatraz lapel pins that Eddie and I are donning. So maybe I will break even, but I will have a lot of fun doing it. So I'm going to have Abby pass this around. I want to note, you want to look at his rap sheet here. He went to Leavenworth, Kansas, federal penitentiary there in '58 because he was a Navy man, and while on leave, he would rob everything. Everything. So he escaped from Leavenworth, and he was, a problem for them, so they sent him to Alcatraz. But he always sends me this correspondence that says at the top, Alcatraz Rest Home, we are on the rocks, world's finest view of the Golden Gate. 88 years old, folks. I'll pass this around. Take a look at what you can. So, in getting to know Karpis in his later years, and maybe how he felt about his life of crime, I'd like to show you a sort of docudrama that was produced in 1976 by a Canadian broadcaster named Larry Solway. And it is an opportunity to really get to know what was going on inside Karpis's head. Now, keep in mind, if you don't know much about Karpis, I will tell you he was not an American citizen. He was from Montreal, and that's where they sent him back to in 1969. So everything from here on out is either Canadian or Spanish. So take a look at this unique, dramatic interview with Karpis himself in 1976 at the age of 68 years old.
The year was 1931. The place, America's Midwest. It was a time which would spawn a new type of criminal. Men not only reckless and insensitive to the harm caused others, but men who would capture the public eye and be placed upon pedestals by some. One such man who epitomized this era of robberies, kidnappings, and murders was Alvin Barker-Karpis, a Canadian born in Montreal who, after joining forces with the notorious Barker gang, became America's public enemy #1. This is his story, as told by the man who lived it in connection with Larry Solway. It is told not in judgment, for such judgment has long been made.
It's rumored or reported that J. Edgar Hoover was instrumental in your arrest. Is there any truth in that? No. Is there any truth in that? You better ask Mr. Hoover. You have no grudges? Grudges? With who? Grudges against J. Edgar Hoover. Well, I never did have.
Just to survive. Here's a story about a man who made his fortune and fame. Robbing disco right around the cops by name. Alcatraz, Freddie Barker, and his mom. Terrorizing folks right through the St. Paul. Robbing banks, payrolls, kidnappings, and all. Alcatraz never did things small. As time wore on, all the cows got red. Yes, and doing just ignorant friend. In early 36, Hoover's boys don't get. They almost took the rap for the snatch of hand. They gave him life, sent him to the block. But he kicked his well, couldn't make him talk. Robbing banks, payrolls, kidnappings, and all. Alcatraz never did things small. Smooth, son of a gun. Public enemy #1. Alcatraz couldn't break the fire, walked away free. Now he's on the outside like you and me. He lived fast and hard without a regret. It was too slow, the kind of life that he lived. Had to do what he did, the chips fell right away. He's lived up through, they find no pay. Robbing banks, payrolls, kidnappings, and all. Alcatraz never did.
How much money could you expect from a little town in Kansas?
It won't be like, say, Concordia, for instance. We made it a point to take those kind of towns during the wheat harvest. The banks had a lot of money to pay the farmers and what the effects. cashing the checks to the Salem Middle Week and so forth. So you might go in town like that in that time of the year and get maybe $50,000 or $60,000 in cash, or in the winter, if you got $10,000 in the same bank, it would be remarkable.
How many men would you usually have with you? What kind of arms did you carry?
Usually machine guns and 45 on the metal.
But you knew you were going to be doing some shooting. You were ready to shoot.
Well, we didn't know we were going. We was hoping we didn't. But if we had to, we wanted to be sure that we had the firepower, but they didn't know.
But anybody got the ready to do so wounded?
Well, as you say, it all depended. No, there was many a time when we were under our viewpoint and got justified in shooting, but that was always one of the big squabbles after one of them.
I want to talk about Chicago in the gangster days. You know, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was done by gangsters, but you're not a gangster, you're a thief.
This is true.
What's the real difference?
Well, all those guys were the rackets, the booze, and the whores, and the gambling, things like that. Those guys were out stealing.
Why wouldn't a guy like you, with a reputation like you have, say, look, I'm going to quit and go to something safer? I'm going to go to work for Capone.
That's much safer.
I could have, but that wasn't, I don't know what you mean by safer. They would play things around, and there was, in the early 20s, there was 300, 400, 500 a year getting killed.
And your risk was only with the law enforcement.
That's right.
Could you go to work for him?
I'm sure I could have, because one of the main characters in their execution squad was involved in hand kidnapping, I saw the drummer kidnapping, and he approached me on this subject.
What about Elliot Ness?
Elliot Ness? Well, you know, with the Untouchables, well, actually, those guys were accountants, lawyers, bookkeepers, what have you. They had no authority to carry a gun. They never had any reason to carry guns. It was their job to simply dig up enough evidence through going through files, bank accounts, canceled checks, and so forth. And when they decided they had enough evidence to give to the DA, it was turned over to him, and then it was up to him to decide whether or not he had sufficient evidence to get an indictment. And in the event the guy got indicted for the income tax, they usually just call at his house and say, hey, you know, you were indicted yesterday. The guy usually say, yeah, I know all about it, yeah.
So they wouldn't smash the doors down with drawn guns?
Well, they didn't have any guns. They didn't even appear on the scene. They told the guy, come on down to the office, bring your lawyer with you. Your bond is going to be such and such. Have the money ready. We're right on the...
You ever pay tax on the money you
Come on.
Nobody ever asked how you were living. Did you have a cover? Did you have a cover story?
Well, people used to think, they used to ask, yes, because I usually drove around in a pretty nice car. I didn't even shave. Sleeping when I'm doing that. So I always say, well, it belongs to my father. He's in the lumber business in Minnesota, or I'd say he's a wholesale grocer in Chicago, or what have you.
It was easy to lie. You just,
how old
were you before you started telling the truth?
I don't think I ever had that. So,
you want to be a couple of years old and 70.
yes, that's right.
What about the cities that the racketeers own, or places where you could put the fix in?
Well, like St. Paul and Minneapolis.
What did you do? How much of the city did you own?
I didn't know any of it. I could live there all I wanted to, as long as I didn't steal anything right in that town.
Do you think corruption has always been a part of American development?
As far as I'm concerned, it always has been, not only in America. Come on, what goes on here in Canada or any place else you want to live. Spain, there's Brazil, Morocco, Italy, you name it, England.
You mentioned Spain, and I know that's where you live now. I was up there for 5 years.
Yes.
When you came out of jail, did you have a lunch?
I had $129.
Well, you must have made some money since then and picked up.
Well, my attorney gave me $2,000 to begin with, and then I made quite a bit of money.
How'd you make money?
Well, it was, I wrote a book. I was in the pizza products business, so I had no problem about money.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, I hope so.
I mean, as far as you're concerned.
Yes, oh, it is, yes.
You met one man who I think most people would agree is mentally unstable in prison, at least one, that's Charles Manson, before the tape murders.
Well, he wasn't, no, I wouldn't say that he was, how did you feel about him being unstable? Well, he was this type of guy. He was probably one of the most mild and meekest sort of persons I ever met in a prison. I never knew him to even have an argument with anyone, much less a quarrel. He was a happy-go-lucky sort of kid. He was rather shiftless. They couldn't get him up in the morning to get into his job. Somebody woke him up. He didn't want to shave sometimes. They'd have to threaten to shave him. Laugh and everything. Straighten up and fly right and get respect.
Karpis was demoted to U.S. Public Enemy #1 following the capture of John Dillinger. It wasn't until May of 1936 that Karpis was finally arrested. News reports at the time say Hoover did the job personally.
Let me talk about you for a minute, because that's probably the guy that sticks in your craw more than anything.
Not really as much as you might imagine.
Well, the story that made Hoover famous was that he personally grabbed Alvin Karpis, public enemy #1. He reached into the car and he disarmed you and grabbed you. That made him a hero. And you say,
I say this, that 28 agents arrested me, and while even they were, well, put a bit excited, most of them, and one week county, put your hands up, in other words, keep your hands down, in other words, sit on the running board.
this is what you were.
Yeah, right, about 5 in the evening, and there was a fellow behind me with a rifle. He was so shaky in the excitement. He wasn't scared of himself.
I mean, you feel the battle vibrating.
Yeah, well, yeah, he couldn't hold it still. So I asked the man in front of me with the machine gun. He seemed to be the coolest in the lot. I said, "Who's the boss of this outfit anyway?" And he said, "Well, he'll be here in a minute. Why?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to tell that guy with the rifle back of me to get it out of my back because he's so nervous. I think he's going to shoot right through me and right through you." And this got the guy a little upset. He heard me say that. He said, "Well, you son of a bitch, when we get you to the office, I'm going to show you who the boss is." And I turned my head like this to answer him. And as I did, up at the corner of the apartment building, this was on the corner, I see a guy peeking around the corner. And I thought, what the hell is this? And when I stopped talking, these other agents that were right close to me, they started looking to see what I was looking at. Well, I had quit talking. And finally, here came another around the corner, looking around the corner. One of the agents shouted, "We got him, Chief. We got him. Come on, everything's all right. We got him." So here they came, and it turned out to be the Gold-Dust twins, as they were known in those days. Hoover and Clyde Wilson.
None of the FBI agents had remembered to bring handcuffs. Karpis' wrists were bound with his own striped necktie. He was tried in Minnesota for the kidnapping of a wealthy brewer. His sentence, life.
Okay, so Karpis adamantly proclaimed that Hoover the hero is false. And so, in trying to do my due diligence with the book, I researched both what Karpis's perception was as well as J. Edgar Hoover. So, from my book, here's what J. Edgar Hoover said. During a June 1957 interview with Ken Jones, Hoover explained, quote, "We did not expect to take Karpis easily, and we planned the raid carefully. 4 assistants and I were to enter the front door. The other squads were deployed in the rear and on both sides of the building," end quote. As claimed by Hoover, the signal for action was delayed when a man on a horse moved into the road lane beside the through traffic. They waited until the horseman passed, and then the agents judiciously moved forward. As Hoover and his agents moved, 2 men stepped from the apartment and walked quickly down the steps. Immediately, the agents recognized Karpis as one of them. As the 2 men walked toward the car on the curb, a young boy on a bicycle scooted between the 2 outlaws and Hoover's vantage point. And to protect the boy, Hoover stated that he and his agents moved out and hurried forward, demanding the surrender of Karpis and Hunter as they entered their car. Hoover gloated that Karpis's expression was, quote, "one of amazement and fright. Neither Karpis nor Hunter resisted. The tough hoodlum turned ashen like all their breed. Their courage oozes away when in the other side of a gun." Hoover said this with his typical confident arrogance. In Hoover's viewpoint, Karpis was especially dangerous because the outlaw was plotting a mass murder of federal agents prior to his capture. Hoover claimed that the murder of these G-men was to be accomplished with a machine gun ambush in Cleveland, Ohio. Karpis would lure G-men to an unnamed street corner, hide in a building nearby. Once the agents arrived, Karpis would open fire on the unwitting lawmen. But Hoover stated that this plot was scrapped in favor of an even more desperate plan. A subsequent plot, Hoover revealed, called for the slaying of Justice Department agents in Los Angeles, in Chicago, and New York, and finally a trip to Washington, D.C. to kill Mr. Hoover himself. But this plan was foiled. For reasons that Hoover never fully explained, no other evidence of this plot has ever been discussed or discovered. Surprise, surprise. So folks, you be the judge. Who's telling the truth? Do you think it's an admitted thief? Do you think it's Karpis? Or do you think it's the controversial lawman J. Edgar Hoover? How many people for Hoover? How many people for Karpis? Yay! Okay, take a look at this.
Alcatraz couldn't break the fire, we walked away free. Now it's on the outside like you and me. He lived fast and hard without regret. It was too slow, the kind of life that he lived. Had to do what he did, the chips fell that way. He's been running through, they find no pay. Robbing banks, people kidnapped, it's an all. The coppers never did they slow. Robbing banks, payrolls, kidnappings, and all. Alvin Karpis never did things slow.
Okay, folks, and this will be my final reading from my book. It is actually my final thoughts about the research. Today, this now desolate former location of the Cleveland Railway, winding its way through the edge of the Garrettsville town limits, serves only to sustain the quaint, historic settlement that originally grew up around the town's gristmill and maple syrup center. Since Karpis's caper, not one individual has heard the echoes of machine gun fire, ghostly screams of terrified victims. There's no reminder of Alvin Creepy Karpis's Wild West venture other than the commemorative historical marker that proudly displays, quote, Creepy Karpis in the Last Great Train Heist. Still living in a charming and rural part of northeastern Ohio, among the cluster of my close-knit neighbors, I settle on this story to tell those out-of-towners when they ask, does anything ever happen in your neck of the woods? It's exciting. This is a real crime story taking place in my hometown, I say, with a bit of smug satisfaction. To this stealthy thief known as Barker-Karpis, Garrettsville proved to be an easy score. And regardless of the many decades that have passed, people here and people everywhere remain very interested in the lore of gangsters. They're drawn to the idea of that era. Undoubtedly, this last great train heist helped pave a path for Karpis to Alcatraz, and it prevented the spectacular fall of J. Edgar Hoover and his coveted FBI. Despite the fact that Karpis still remains fairly unexplored when compared to his fellow celebrity prisoners at Alcatraz, visitors can still view Karpis' mugshot as a main attraction on the wall of the abominable cell house. And many decades after Alcatraz closed its doors and headed into retirement, the former Supermax facility still conjures up images of an inescapable prison where the world-class badasses atone for their crimes. In the end, can we trust the words of an admitted thief? And Karpis' words stack up against the official records of the FBI and the testimony of J. Edgar Hoover himself? There's no final jeopardy here, but what has been stated with certainty is that Bill Trent, Karpis' first co-author, never once in all his fact-checking found a Karpis story to be in error. Karpis' story reminds us all of what J. Edgar Hoover himself emphasized. Quote, "What's important at this time is to re-clarify the difference between hero and villain. In the reading of the story, an individual is intrigued to ask, who was the real villain and who was the hero? The answer? There are stories where the villain becomes the hero, but this is not one of them. Yet redemption remained possible for both Karpis and Hoover, who competed neck and neck in the court of criminal appeal. And Karpis' tug-of-war with J. Edgar Hoover also shined a spotlight on a justice system that needed to look beyond prison to the active work of redemption in our society. Of equal importance, this local to national story serves as a reminder that if an individual is feeling disconnected from society and you want to promote dialogue, begin an inquiry into the history of your place, the place where we now stand. Thank you. Okay, another applause for Miss Abby Stevenson. Stick-up people, Phil McCoy, the front row. So I'm sure you have some questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I first want to mention that I do have my book available here, so if you are interested in it, I do have it, and I will sign it, thankfully. So before I do that, though, I will be happy to take as many questions as you have.
How did he get the name Creepy?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, she asked, how did he get the name Creepy? And the answer to that is kind of twofold. Initially, it was believed when they first wrote the first book, his first autobiography, that it was Fred Barker, part of the mob Barker gang of the 1930s, because he had a mischievous and half-cocked smile that it was creepy. So that's how he got the name. But Karpis himself later said in his second book that he was trying to escape the cops by car, and that was when they first got the APB. Police departments were basically modernized, and so over the APB they heard that man, that guy is creepy because he always shirks the cops. He always got away. Either somebody told him to expect a surprise raid, or he just had a really cunning and almost clairvoyant sense of trouble. So that's how we got the name Creepy, was really from the cops, and then that got into the media and it just went like wildfire. Good question, thank you. Judy in the back.
Did he have any family?
Did he have any family? This is answered in my book. But I will tell you, I will give you the answer to that. He had a common law wife named Dolores Delaney. And they gave birth in 1934 to a son named Raymond Alvin Karpis. They actually decided on Raymond because that was his alias. They thought that'd be really cool to have name their son Raymond. Unfortunately, he grew up, became a petty thief. He died in 2001. Karpis had a grandson who committed suicide in 1988. So, though there are some nieces and nephews left, but that's it. Claudia.
Did he ever repent and find peace with God? Do you know?
Well, if I let you run through that entire video, he will say he's unapologetic about anything. So, but then I read from his nephew, who also grew up in Kansas, that he was very sorry for his crimes and it was a wasted life. So he kind of went back and forth. I think it depended on the theatrical element at the time. So I don't think he was sorry personally in doing the research. Good question. Yes.
What was the time here in Bristol? What was his age? Is he still alive?
No. The question was, how old was Karpis when he pulled off the crime here in Garrettsville? The second part of that question was, how old was he when he died? He was 71 years old when he died. He died in Spain. He lived there for quite a few years after he was deported back to Montreal. And they first believed that it was a suicide. That's how it was publicized. They later did an autopsy and they said it was heart failure. So he died at 71 in an unmarked grave in Spain. I think it's been moved since then, so there's no trace of it anywhere now. When he pulled off the Last Great Train Heist, he was, that was 35. He would have been 26 years old. 26 years old. So in 26 years at Alcatraz, 33 years total in federal penitentiary, and the other years were spent Washington Island, island off Washington State. It's called McNeil Federal Penitentiary, and that's where he met Charles Manson and taught him how to play the guitar. And it's just, you can't, like I said, you can't make stuff like this up. It's just, there's so much to cover, I need another 200 pages. Any other questions in the back? Rebecca?
What happened to the getaway car?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What happened to the getaway car?
The getaway car, actually, John Zetzer was a rum runner in the 1930s, and he piloted the plane that took him from Fort Clinton to Arkansas, Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so he disposed of the car and the plane. And there's a picture of him in here that I found at the Ottawa Historical Society here in Ohio. They had one of the only pictures, I think, that exists. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, he's staying next to the plane. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How exactly did the FBI eventually track him down?
Through informants. They were just beginning. They were in the infancy of the forensic. And so they realized that's how they connected them to the two kidnappings. Was they left fingerprints on the gasoline cans when they went to refuel because they got out of town and far away. Essentially, the forensic evidence he was keeping ahead of that. So because he had in Hot Springs, in northeastern Ohio, he frequented the Harvard Club just outside of the Cleveland city limits, and he had a host of accessories there that helped him stay ahead of the law. And really, it was girlfriends and basically brothels where he picked up these girlfriends, and they were threatened by the FBI, and they told everything they knew. So that's how he was caught. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
They couldn't pin any murders on him?
The question was, could they pin any murders on him? No, they could not, because if they would have, he would have got the electric chair at the time. He was associated with 14 murders, one of them being a sheriff, and he was acquitted of that. Basically, they couldn't find any evidence. But he indicates in this film too that He never intentionally shot anybody, but likely people got killed in the midst and the heat of their crimes. So he didn't, in my research, come off as a cop killer or somebody who sought out to kill individuals. That would be Freddie Barker and Arthur Doc Barker and anybody affiliated other than Karpis with the Ma Barker gang. Yes, sir, in the back.
Did you do any research on the whereabouts of his machine guns? Because those things would be very collectible on the collector's market today.
No, you know, there's so much material here in Keeping Busy, the machine gun location. I was more worried about the money, quite frankly. I was trying to trail the money while I was doing the research. That was my main goal, but didn't find the money or the guns. No. Any other questions? No, that's it. Well, thank you folks so much. Again, my book is available. I really appreciate you being so attentive. And yes, thanks again to Abby Stevenson and to the members of the Freedom Township Historical Society.